I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about the wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far into the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion. My mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went into the forest for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it, and when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion we'd notice the dogs staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing scary about it, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response, but if we shined a flashlight around we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second. Something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out to the backyard and the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She said there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground and it was a little too tall to be a person and was sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring directly at her. She called for our dad, saying that there was a man in the yard staring through her window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it suddenly just wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. My parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks and stopped bothering even opening the door until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the whole time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months. Start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him before he made it into the forest. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage because he wanted to see how he looked when sleepwalking, I guess thinking it'd look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over and hurt herself, he ran in and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was coming from. He told her to wait where she was while he grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back inside the house for the flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us about hearing my sister's voice in the forest, so when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact that I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walking past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she got in her sweater, caught in some branches, and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the windows wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking, and he woke up standing at the fence staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. We woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors, and he suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the spirit of Halloween, joking about how maybe we should all get exercise, just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest, behind our house at night, but I get the feeling that, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. When I was 14 years old, I went to a church gathering on a Halloween night that was called Hallelujah Night, a Christian alternative to Halloween. My family and I would get there in the afternoon since we'd volunteer to help set up the booths, cakewalk, candy barrels, etc. But I was mostly there to get first dibs on all of the candy. After I finished helping with the usual booth I helped set up, I took a seat on a bench near the main sanctuary. It was my favorite place to sit at since I could see the entire lot and most of all the beautiful sunset. I pulled out my PSP and was scrolling through some music I had on it when some guy approached me and started a conversation. I've never been a people person, so usually when things like this happen, I keep the conversation short. However, this guy had this weird type of warmth to him as if he was a friend of mine. As the conversation carried on, I started to ask him if he was new, because I hadn't seen him before. He told me that he had been going to this church for years, but left after an incident happened. When I asked him about the incident, he paused, looked at me and said that there's some things people pick up on that they know aren't normal. Also, that you should never get curious about things that you know you should leave alone. I had a sort of confused look on my face since I didn't know what he meant at that time. The guy noticed it and said that I would understand once I got older. I looked down at my PSP that I had in my hand still and looked back up, and the guy was gone. I looked around and couldn't find him anywhere in the lot except for a few people still prepping for Hallelujah Night. It didn't make any sense. Fast forward to a few months later, I was sitting in the main sanctuary before leaving to do my usual volunteer work on the upper floor of the main sanctuary. The upper floor was a daycare area for kids. So at the end of the service, volunteers would escort the children downstairs, and I would go into each room, shutting off the lights and making sure no children were still up there. I'll never forget getting to leave to do my usual duties when the pastor started talking about an upcoming funeral. I look at the big screens on each side of the main sanctuary, and the face of that of the man I was talking to during Hallelujah Night was there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. To this day, it still seems unreal. I was beyond shook as I made my way out of the main sanctuary into the flights of big stairs as I went to the upper floor. Once I made it up to the upper floor, another volunteer had confirmed that all the children were escorted downstairs. She noticed that I had looked sort of pale from seeing what I saw in the main sanctuary and asked me if I was okay. I told her it was nothing and proceeded to cut off all of the lights on the upper floor as she left downstairs. The upper floor was like a giant hallway with doors on each side and a door at the end of the hallway with a giant window in it. When I came to the last room at the end of the hall, I would always leave the blinds on that big window open since the light always illuminated the dark hallway and made me feel less scared. But as I left the room, I remember feeling panicked. It started freezing, and I felt like if I left that room, something was waiting for me in the darkened rooms that was going to jump out and attack me. As I'm trying to muster up the courage to just run for it, I see a small head of a child peek out a couple of doors down. It stayed there for a few seconds, and then put its head back in the room. I immediately called out to the child, but no answer. The fear I had a minute ago was gone as I left the last room to go through the illuminated hallway. I made it to the other room in a matter of seconds. I was cutting on the lights and searching the entire room for the child I saw, but no one was there. I started getting spooked again as I cut off the lights in that room. Then one of the most terrifying things I'd ever seen and experienced happened. As I was leaving the room, I looked back at the last room's window, which illuminated the hallway, and out of nowhere I see a massive black mass move in front of the window, almost covering the light completely. It was darker than black, and its outline as it covered the light seemed to be moving. It was enough to scare me to run for my life. I ran through the rest of the hallway and down the stairs. I was stopped by one of the ushers, who told me not to run, but when I told him what I saw, he looked at me as if I was crazy. Once church was over, I told my parents about what happened on the ride home, and they ended up not believing me since they're skeptics. But I know what I saw that day, and it's something that still scares me. To this very day. In 1999, I moved back to Washington State from traveling around the country for 4 years. My grandmother let me move in with her for a while so I could get back on my feet again. I hated the basement of her house, always have, but it was rent-free, and she was cool with Chuck, my 90-pound black lab. Plus, my grandma and I got along pretty well. Late one night, at about 3 months in, I woke up because Chuck was moving around on the bed and he kept shaking the mattress. And then I heard him start grumping. You know those grumpy groans old dogs make when you scratch behind their ears and they love it? He started doing that. Once I realized what I was hearing, I sat up to yell at him to go back to sleep. That's when I discovered the reason he was moving around so much. He was trying to get closer to the woman standing right next to my bed, scratching him behind the ear. I didn't scream, and I'm proud of that. But also, what in God's name, where did she come from? Who was she? Why was she standing in my room petting my dog at 3 a.m.? All these questions I had in my head, I was too scared to ask. I did the only thing I knew how to do in these situations. I hid under my blanket. Certainly she would be gone by the time I re-emerged from under the blanket. That's how these things are supposed to work, right? I waited for a little while, but when I came out from under the blanket, she was still there. So I hid under the blanket again, 3 more times. Every time I came back out, she'd still be there, smiling at me and scratching my dog's ear. The last time I was under the covers, I realized that I wasn't actually afraid of the woman. Chuck and I met under stressful situations, for both of us, and because of that, he and I had a super strong bond. I trusted him implicitly. He would have reacted to her negatively. His reaction was clearly positive, so I figured that she probably wasn't there to kill me. So I came out from under the blanket one last time, intending to deal with the freaky woman still standing right next to my bed. Somehow I decided that turning on the light would make her disappear. I reached over and snapped the bedside lamp on. I don't know why I thought that would work. Is that even a thing? Are ghosts supposed to disappear in the light? Well, they turned on the light and she didn't, so I don't think that's a thing. By then, she'd been standing at my bedside, heading checked for several minutes, and I was out of ghost-busting options, so I gave up on being terrified and just looked at her. Really looked at her. I can still see her right now in my mind, dressed up in a classy brown pantsuit with a cream-colored blouse. She had shoulder-length auburn hair, styled beautifully with these big loopy curls. She only stopped by for a second to say hello. She was very pretty, and she looked happy. I didn't have the nerve to talk to her, or at least I don't remember speaking, but I stayed present and we looked at each other for a while. I remember having the distinct impression of her knowing I was there. Of both of us being aware of the other. Then she stopped petting Chuck and walked to the end of my bed, stood up straight and proud and dissolved away. I mean that very literally. First her clothes, then her skin, organs, and bones. Like that guy at the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. I remember what her blood looked like as it dissolved away to reveal her skeleton. That should be a gross and terrifying memory, but I don't remember it like that. At the time it felt like she was doing it on purpose. Like she'd wanted to leave with the most dramatic exit she could manage. I remember thinking, this should scare the pants off of me, but also, wow. Somehow I got back to sleep, and in the morning over coffee I was going to tell my grandmother about what happened, but she just received an upsetting phone call. Apparently her best friend from high school, Ursula, had passed away in the middle of the night. I'd heard stories about their teenage shenanigans, especially the one about the stolen birthday cake, but I never saw a picture of Ursula, so I asked what she looked like. Well, I couldn't tell you what she looked like these days, but when we were young, she had the most beautiful, curly auburn hair. That's not the only weird thing that happened in my grandmother's basement, but it remains the most vivid and the least scary. Many of us encounter someone who just grabs our attention in a way that we can't explain. Like they know you from this or a previous life. I come from a long line of people who encountered ghosts, but I myself don't encounter the supernatural that much. I have in the past, but not often. Tonight, I know I did. This is not fake or made up. Our town is near a beach, and every 4th of July, we go see the fireworks over the water. This year was no exception. Me and my wife arrived and set up chairs, settled in the sand and chilled out waiting for darkness to fall and the fireworks to start. A slight breeze, a perfect beautiful evening. About 20 minutes after we settled, I smelled a waft of what I can only describe as decayed roses on the breeze, like flowers in a vase that should have been thrown out a few days ago. It wasn't a bad smell, but just like sweet roses that weren't fresh. And then I saw her. From behind walked a young woman in jean shorts, t-shirts, and ball cap. She looked about 25 and had light brown wavy hair coming down about halfway on her back. I was immediately struck by her presence. Not because she was beautiful. I mean, she wasn't ugly. She was pretty, and she looked a bit off though. Her face especially looked pretty but weird, I suppose. Like her features didn't line up right or something. She stopped about 15 feet ahead of us and turned around. She looked right at me and smiled, then sat down in the sand. Again, she really did look off. Something was amiss. But I was enchanted by this young woman. I looked at my wife to see what she thought, but got zero reaction, like she didn't even see her. I smelled the decayed roses on the wind again. This young woman in jean shorts and ball cap sat down, took off her flip-flops, and looked to the sky. She was sitting perpendicular to us, but facing away. When I thought about it more, two things struck me as very, very odd. She had no electronics. No cell phone. Everyone on the beach was taking selfies and playing with their phones. Even the elderly. This young woman had no visible phone. No electronics. Also, her clothes looked straight out of the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s, so I know what normal people looked like back then, and she had that 70s look. Totally down to the tomboy jeans, and really just everything about her. She seemed very content just sitting there looking at the sky and not worried about cell phones, or beach chairs, or anything. Again, I smelled sweet decaying roses on the wind. I took a picture of the whole scene on my cell phone. The pretty sky, the beach, and the strange woman. Shortly after, she got up and walked away behind us. I looked around to see where she went, but she disappeared. When I got home and looked at the picture, I actually was not surprised to see she didn't appear in it. You might think I would have freaked out, but at some spiritual level, I really didn't expect her image to show up. Just a green orb appeared where she was sitting in the sand. I'm calm about it because I could tell she meant no harm. I really believe she was a person who passed away back in the 70s, and she was just checking in on me for some reason. I'm racking my brain to try and remember if I knew a young woman who passed away when I was a child back then. I just can't put it together right now. We moved into a house in Northamptonshire a few years ago and instantly felt something was odd with the house. That feeling when someone is watching you. Cold drafts. My husband started feeling compelled to say things. He'd tell me what I'd done during the day with eerie detail. He'd tell me about a girl who talked to him, but in his head. Things started going missing or would be moved to random places. One day he said, "I've never heard that word, nor has he." I just assumed it was another one of his made-up words, but it turned out it's a word meaning someone who's enjoying watching canals. There are a lot of canals in the area, and one in the village. When I asked why he said that word, he told me the girl had said it to him and she loved the canal. The weirdest thing that happened though was one evening when both my husband and our daughter wanted to shower. They decided hubby would go first, but as we sat in our bedroom, we heard the bathroom door close. The light goes on and the shower starts, so we assumed our daughter must have just beaten them to it. The shower ran for 45 minutes, and just as we're going to check and make sure she's okay, we heard the shower stop and her come out of the bathroom and go downstairs. The light was left on. My husband turned off the light and followed her downstairs and watched her go into her bedroom, which was downstairs. As he walked into the kitchen though, our daughter walked back in the door. When he asked her how she'd gotten dressed and out so quickly, she told him she'd been out for the last hour seeing to her horses. So who was in the shower? He saw a girl again a few weeks later, also stood in our daughter's doorway. Lots of other strange things happened there, but never anything scary, just freaky. Anyway, we moved a couple of years ago, and nothing has happened since. Until this weekend. We went away to a hotel in Cornwall. On the first night, it was very foggy and cold. As we stood outside having a cig, he suddenly said, Joan is waiting in the summer house." I asked what on earth he was talking about. He had a strange look in his face and just said, "Joan is waiting in the summer house for Derek." Then he sort of snapped out of it. Mouth hanging open, and said, "I have no idea where that came from." We talked about it and he said he felt compelled to say those things. He also felt she was military. We carried on discussing it for a while, then mid-sentence he said, "She's married and she's waiting in the summer house." A bit spooked, we decided to go back to our room. We searched on the internet and found out that in 1946, a young woman who was serving in the Navy was stationed at the hotel. Her name was Joan. She was having an affair with a married officer. When they were found out, she was transferred to another site in Devon. On the night she was due to move, she was waiting for him in the summer house where he shot her twice in the head. His name was William. We were totally freaked out. The man's name was wrong, but at that time, people used to be known by other names frequently, i.e. my granddad was John, but called Jack, my grandma was Grace, called Queenie. Perhaps he was really known as Derek. I've always been interested in the paranormal and witnessed and experienced some events that I can't explain to this day, but I'm a very rational person, so I always brushed it off, while keeping an open mind, of course. But one of these experiences left me with no doubt. My current girlfriend used to work at a cafe, bakery, and an old building in Bordeaux. She used to close at night alone because she was the store manager and stayed after the crew was done to count the register, do all the paperwork, etc. The bakery consisted of the storefront, the kitchen in the back, and the office in the back as well. There's also a second floor, which is only storage and the changing rooms for the staff. The building isn't shared, it was only the cafe bakery. She told me she felt uneasy as soon as her first shift there. Most nights she'd hear running footsteps upstairs, the TVs in the sitting area, for the customers turning off and on randomly, and the front door's doorbell ringing while the door was not moving. All that when she was alone. Another coworker she was close with shared the same experiences with her. I believed her because she has a history of paranormal encounters and is very serious about that stuff, but I wasn't convinced until I witnessed it. I also worked in the food industry, so I was rarely off when she was working too. One Sunday I was off, so I decided to come pick her up. and spent the last 30 to 45 minutes of her workday she usually spends alone with her this time. She gave me a tour of the place, and it did feel uneasy, but nothing significant happened except for some rattling noises upstairs, until I mentioned how quiet her ghost of the bakery was. She was counting the register in the office in the back of the store. I was leaning against the wall in the corridor leading to the office, my back turning away from the storefront. To my right, there was the dishwashing room. There was no door to this room, just an opening in the corridor. To better visualize, I was facing towards the office watching my girlfriend, turning my back to the storefront, leaning against the wall, but seeing the dishwashing room in my peripheral vision. Jokingly, I tell her, "I'm glad your ghost decided to leave us alone tonight." Not 1 second after I finish my sentence, the pile of glasses and dishes in the dishwashing room go flying. I saw the whole room clearly in my side vision, and there was no one or nothing that could have done that. There was a pile of glasses stacked up in a pyramid, and they flew as if someone ran their hand through the base. There wasn't one glass tripping and bringing down the pyramid. It was legitimately pushed off. She just told me, "I told you he's always there." Since she's used to stuff like that happening, she was almost done, so we stayed less than I could feel a different level of oppression and uneasiness for the whole time. This one sticks with me because there's no rational explanation. I saw the dishes go flying around, and it was a direct response to my joke. I have no other experiences that could be explained. I'd be happy to post them if you want to find an explanation or lack of with me. Driving through a ghost on a pitch-black forest road, seeing a school kid ghost sat on my bed at night. Cats behaving weirdly. I've had a lot of paranormal stuff, but the one I just told is just outright the weirdest. Moderately typical teenager from Japan. I'm male, and ever since I can remember I have throughout my lifetime had recurring encounters with some strange people, be it in terms of looks or behavior. These encounters can happen anywhere from a week's space to several months, and it always seems like when I do, it was their intention to meet me. My most recent one was on my way home from school. About to text one of my friends that I had planned to have over at my house later. As I looked up, a young man looking like he was in his 20s was approaching me a few meters ahead. This confused me for a minute as it was a straight and fairly long path ahead. I thought to myself that while I may have been looking at my phone, I would surely have noticed him coming from the corner of the path a good length away, or at least I expected him to be closer to that corner. But there he was. Approaching from the middle as if he had appeared from thin air. His hair was dark brown, a bit unkempt, but still good looking, and he had green eyes. His clothes were fairly ordinary too, keeping a sort of laid-back summer style to it. The most remarkable thing about him was his tattoo, or mark per se. A black line running from his left chin and down underneath his shirt. As he got closer enough for conversation, he stopped me and asked for my name. When I told him, he said that he heard about me before. This confused me as I'm not exactly a celebrity, but I thought nothing more of it. We then had some boring small talk, but he genuinely seemed pretty cheerful. Just as he was about to take off, he told me that I should probably wait for my friend. He didn't give me much of a chance to respond to this before walking off in the direction he came from. I thought about what he'd said, and turned around to walk back to school. I glanced behind my back not long after, only to find that it was nowhere to be seen. As I made it back to my school, I sure enough find my friend waiting by the gate. She apparently thought that we were going to walk to my place together and had been waiting for me for quite a long time. I apologized and we began walking, and well, that's the end of it. I didn't tell her about the encounter, but I thought about it when she left. I didn't tell him or hint about my friend at all, so how would he have known? These types of encounters have kept on happening throughout my whole life, sometimes very frequently, and I don't know why. These people I meet just seem too unreal, and usually know something I never told them about, which leads me to believe that maybe these people aren't human after all. I'm a 30-year-old female and had just woken up and was getting ready for the day in our bathroom, which is attached to our bedroom. If you look through the door, you have a full view of our bed and my sleeping 5-year-old son. I saw something adult-sized move past the door in the dark bedroom at regular walking speed, so I opened the door a bit and looked out. There was no one there, and my kid was snoring. My husband should have been at work for 2 hours by this point. I checked our security cameras and saw nothing but me husband leaving for work earlier, and I chalked it up to my anxiety, sleep deprivation, as I'm heavily pregnant and can't sleep for anything right now. A few minutes later I heard what sounded like an adult man humming, but it only lasted a few seconds. Can't name the tune, though. I couldn't tell where I was coming from as we slept with the box fan on full blast right outside the door, and I had the exhaust fan on at the time. I looked out of the bathroom door again. Nothing. Am I going crazy? I thought. I took a deep breath and continued washing my face. The door was open about 2 to 3 inches, and the mirror in our tiny bathroom is one that covers most of the wall, from the counter to almost the ceiling. It's big and you can see everything behind you and around you. The door is to my left right behind me. You could reach it and tap my shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye through the mirror, I suddenly saw something that wasn't there before. There was a hand reaching through the opening of the door, gripping the door frame right behind me. It looked like a grown man's hand and was at eye level. I froze and then turned around, half expecting my husband to be playing a prank, because who else would be in here with me? The hand was gone. I even checked through the mirror. Instantly my child screamed, "Mama," as loud as they could, and I jerked the door open. Nothing there but scared kid's eyes wide open. He wasn't looking at me. Who was that? Who, baby? I was trying not to sound scared. He stared off into space for a few seconds, then seemingly forgot about whatever just happened. Mama, why did you say my name? I didn't, baby. Did you hear your name? You said my name real loud and then you weren't beside me. I was in the bathroom. I don't think I did, buddy. It sounded like you. I checked the cameras, I checked the windows and doors, every room and closet, shaking the whole time. Nothing. I feel safer living in this apartment than I ever have anywhere else, even alone, and I have bad anxiety. Like I said, if it was only one of us, I would have shrugged it off as sleep deprivation or night terrors, which my kid has never had, or something rational. But I'm asking all of you. What did we see? And hear?